So yes, I am the Keith that Bianca so kindly referenced. Thank you. And I work with the City of Toronto's Open Data team for sure. I've been doing that now for the last little while, actually about 5 years. I was there at the beginning, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I want to put a face on open data for you tonight, what the city is doing. And what is that face? We like to think it's the happy face. And everywhere you go these days, you see the happy face. I was getting some bottled water today, and they put it in the happy face bag. And I thought, great, great. Psyching me up for tonight. And even walking here, I think Urban Outfitters has a T-shirt in one of their mannequins with a happy face on it. So I think that's important, though, because our Open Data team wants to put on a happy face to Open Data, both inside and outside. And tonight you are the without group, being that you're not internal to the city. And we do both. We talk to people inside and people outside. And the energy that we feel and the stuff, information we get, especially from outside groups, really helps propel us along. The kind of things Bianca was saying. I want to give you a quick anecdote, too, about the happy face thing. Our recently departed manager, Trish Garner, who among us all really deserves a shout-out, was in a meeting with us. This goes back a few years, actually. And she said, you know, team, I think we're getting a little negative. We have to start thinking positively here about this and what we want to do and so on. So let's think positively. 20 minutes or so in the meeting, I believe, I brought up a term for a situation we were talking about, and I said, oh, that's a real can of worms. The person sitting beside me said, yes, but it's a half-full can of worms. So we do try to remember to be positive because it's very important, and certainly the energy that we feel out there in the community are very positive folks. But actually, to our real face, I think we're a little bit out there. In the introduction, I talked about it was mentioned the wildly enthusiastic team, and it's quite true. We learned quite early that we should be a little out there, and I'm not sure what your impressions are of the traditional public servant and so on. But we certainly didn't want to necessarily fit into that stereotype. So we were definitely a little bit out there, and we are a little bit out there. And also we found the whole situation and cosmos and ethos, if you like, of open data is a bit messy. And one of the first things we heard was, don't be afraid of that. It is messy. Just dive in. And we'll talk more about that too. So let's just drill in a little bit. How many of you are aware when we started, actually? Anyone? Richard, I'll cheat to you. 2009, actually. Then Mayor David Miller was at a MESH conference here in Toronto, and he announced, so this is in April, that by the fall, the City of Toronto will start releasing their data. So we all went, what? But as a matter of fact, it did. We made the deadline of the fall, and the genie was out of the bottle, and away we go. But actually, there was an event that happened prior to that announcement in 2009. We put on a City of Toronto Web 2.0 summit, so it's back in 2008. And a gentleman by the name of Mark Sermon spoke at this event. Now, are any of you familiar with Mark? Do you want to say what he does? Executive Director for Mozilla Foundation. So this is a local lad working in Toronto. So Mark had a keynote lunch speak for us. And this is what he had to say, and this is where our cue for audio portion comes up. So hopefully we'll be able to hear this.
What I actually want to talk about is how to make a city that thinks like the web. And
are you getting it
through is a city that can think
to the speakers?
Web. In particular because, like me, there are thousands of people in this city who have been involved.
Okay, let me roll it back to the start.
What I actually want to talk about is how to make a city that thinks like the web. And I think Toronto is a city that can think like the web, in particular because, like me, there are thousands of people in this city who have been involved in building things like Firefox, in building the open web that we have. And, you know, those people don't have industry associations, they don't have, you know, big fancy offices, but they're here. And they care about the city, and they love the city, and they've got something to offer.
So key statement there is think like the web and take advantage of your community. And I think a lot of you tonight are who Mark speaks about and spoke about, certainly. So the idea of thinking like the web is something that we really took to heart. And what does that mean, think like the web? Didn't know you'd be quizzed tonight, did you? It's an interesting statement. We had to think about it. Okay, what does that mean? Any ideas? Just what do you think? Yeah, be everywhere. Iterations, absolutely. Non-literally, yeah. All of that. Somebody else going to? making odd connections. There you go, back to the messy and kind of being out there. So we really took that to heart, and we thought, okay, let's go for it. And of course, when Mayor Miller made the announcement, it was awesome. I mean, it was the kind of things that we were hoping we could start doing in the city. So one of the things that we've been using as a metaphor for internal staff and when we talk to outside staff is the idea of what is our data, our raw data in the City of Toronto. We consider that to be the ingredients of this process, if you like. And actually, the gentleman who came up with this metaphor, I want to give him credit, Mark Johnstone. This is the full metaphor, that you start with the raw ingredients, you put it together in the cake, which is the information, you add a little bit of stuff on top of it to make a nice presentation, and then folks consume it. So it's kind of a cool concept, and we really fit in on that data side, that raw data side for the City of Toronto. We learned early that we had to learn what it is we wanted to do. And the best way to do that, we felt, was to go out inside the community and see what was going on and listen and engage. So some of the things that we're seeing on the screen here are the kinds of things we got involved with. Gov camps, change camps. Vendor days is something that we do inside the city where we invite vendors in to explain what they've got going. It's one of the ways we can learn about products in a legal situation. There was a discussion about procurement, one of the questions, in terms of the AODA, the accessibility. So there is a process, and I'll talk about that maybe when we get to the Q&A. But all of this was a way that we would start getting engaged and find out what was going on and learn. In other words, we aren't hackathon people. I mean, we didn't do hackathons. We didn't even understand the term when we were first invited to a hackathon. But I think we learned quickly. And we also learned that we shouldn't necessarily be doing that stuff. We should be participating, but not necessarily, creating it and deciding it's going to be run at 2 p.m. at City Hall, for example. It could be in a place like this. And it really started to open our minds, I guess, in terms of what it was we were trying to do with our data. So that really is the crowdsourcing concept and actually asking for help, which I also think breaks the stereotype of government. We're actually asking for help. So that brings to a better batter, the formatting of data. And we learned, too, that we needed to do things with our data to make it more presentable. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we have to think about how we're presenting it, the availability and accessibility on the website. So one of the things we realized we had to do from all of this insight we were getting from the outside community was we have to change the culture on the inside. And that's where what was in the introduction, the idea of educate, stimulate, pontificate, job relate, to get that data to the open data real estate, which is, of course, toronto.ca/open. How many of you have actually been to our website, toronto.ca/open? Excellent, excellent. So this is it. A fine-looking website, I must say. I could go to the live site. Maybe we will during the question and answers, but I just thought I'd give you a couple of page renderings here. The data catalog, of course, is mostly what it's all about for those seeking the raw data. And any idea how many data sets we actually have on the website now? Want to shout out a guess? 120? No? No. No, you're somewhere a little less than that. Actually, pretty close, pretty close. It says on the website. 136. I think we're, kind of expanding it to 140 there. The true number is 136. Make that change, mental note.
How do you make your data more trustworthy?
There you go. There you go. 136. Actually, it might be 140 today. So that's 5 years in, by the way, 136. We started with about 30 data sets almost immediately, and that was what we called the low-hanging fruit, and we've kind of picked all that low-hanging fruit to get at this number, which has been hovering in that ballpark. So it's getting a little more difficult to get that data that we know there is demand for, and we'll talk about that as well, and hopefully in the QA even. Another aspect of the website I want to draw your attention to is the data A side, which is a playground that we created, which it had a blog about a year and a half ago. We'll probably resurrect that a bit later, but it's a space where we can talk about all issues around data, which is more than just the raw open data. Our real dream is that we expand this to include visualization tools and some of our own interpretation of our own data, and that you folks coming to the website would be able to access and do your own numbers crunching and so on. So it's sort of moving along beyond the open raw data concept. And of course, we're using Twitter a lot to engage, and we found that to be a really good place to be. So one of the things we'd like you to remember is our hashtag, the Data A hashtag. And tonight, when you came in, there was a handout of our open data fortune teller. This is something that we use inside, and we have a number of these left over. This is a bit out of date now, actually, so I like to at least hand it out and show people what we're doing. It's kind of a nice throwback, if you like, to sharing some information. So that's another important part to the website. But back to moving into the metaphor of the baking the cake and so on. Some of the things that we've had to do to start the process in motion, we literally call it pole vaulting, leapfrogging, going sideways. In fact, even tunneling, if you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that goes on above the ground, the meetings and all the discussions about policy and legal, and it's all important stuff, mind you. But we're sometimes tunneling underground, meeting up with people and trying to figure things out that way. And we found it to be quite effective, actually. And I should mention, too, that we're associated with the City Clerk's Office, so it's really a partnership in our Open Data Initiative that we champion both together. And City Clerks is certainly the people who do the privacy diligence. They've pushed forward a policy. We actually have an open data policy inside the city, and virtually all the cities that have started to deal with open data have arrived at these things. We have to deal with the license, and what is the policy? Are you actually releasing all your data or only some of the data? So it's a very important role that our City Clerk's Office plays. And our side is to do a lot of the external engagements and, of course, make sure the data gets to the website, and any issues that come about there, we're also responsible for. Ultimately, we feel if we get the data, and it's really our mission at this point, is to get more data to toronto.ca/open. If that happens, we feel others will, in fact, start baking the cake. And probably the old adage about too many cooks is a bad thing. In the case of open data, it's not really a bad thing. If you think about it, there's all kinds of different ingredients you could use to bake a cake. There is no one right way to bake a cake. So I guess our role is to make sure that the ingredients we have, what we own, is available to those who want to bake the cake. And the province of Ontario has come into open data, the open data arena in a big, big way. And that's a great thing, because now we can actually talk about the provincial data that's available and our data that's available locally to deal with things like transportation. And what we've found in the past is people that we would approach inside will actually be saying to us, well, no, we can't release that data because the province owns it, has jurisdiction over it. And now we can actually bring in the province and say, well, here's the province. And they'll come in and say, well, that's not quite true. You actually can release that data. So it's a really nice relationship that we've been developing with the province as well. And we've seen actually over the last 5 years quite an extensive development of apps, visualizations. More and more are coming all the time. And if you're aware of stuff, we'd like to know. We don't necessarily go out and search every day to see if there's a new app that's been developed. So a lot of this we've relied on the community to share. Hey, I've developed a new app. Can you put it on your apps page? And we certainly will. And there's more than just apps, of course. So it's web, it's also mobile, and so on. The icing, which is sort of making things a little better, I can give you a quick example. I don't know if you know Tom Emmerich, who's a local lad. He's a Google Glass guy, one of the few people in Canada who's been able to test the Google Glass. So Tom created an application for Google Glass that's about restaurants in Toronto. So you can put on the glass and swipe away and find out the nearest location and so on. And we do have Dine Safe information on our website. So when we met Tom, we were encouraging him to actually bring in the Dine Safe layer on top of his Google Glass app. He's got things like Yelp and reviews of restaurants and so on. It would be interesting if he could add that layer using the Dine Safe stuff to actually give you the restaurant inspections. That's the green, yellow, and red that was referenced earlier. So that's an example of icing, improving, adding more layers on top, and back to too many cooks is a great thing. And of course, then there's the final thing of it being consumed and being used. And that's where it really hits the road. So Bianca's examples, I think, were great. That's where people really start to understand how data can be used to benefit the citizen. And it doesn't always just benefit the outside folks. When we're talking inside, we certainly like to mention how useful that is to us as well. And the more things we can develop, the better. And the INT group is actually moving towards a business intelligence unit, the BI unit, of which open data will have a home, at least for us in IT. And our plans there are to introduce desktops support for our own internal staff to start leveraging the data. What is the data telling us? So it's back to that inside-outside kind of thing that we're trying to do. So it's really not always external people who are going to benefit by the data. It may, in fact, be our own staff who will be able to make really much more informed decisions by understanding what is the data telling them. So it's all got value. I don't know if you've heard of Derek Sivers. He's a gentleman who did a TED Talk, and I think this is a really appropriate video. When I first saw it, I thought, gee, this really reminds me of what happened with us, and in fact the whole open data movement. So we've got video with sound again.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So, notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So, over the next minute, you'll see all of those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that, TED. Thanks.
Sorry, let's get back to where we are. So interesting, and I think Toronto wasn't the first guy. That wasn't us, but we were in the pack. Really, places like Vancouver and down in the States, Washington, New York City, were very heavily involved in open data around 2008-ish. And then comes 2009, and Mayor Miller and his executive assistant, actually Ryan Merkley, also deserves a shout out for saying we should get in this arena. And I think it's really proven to be true. We're finding more and more cities are getting into the open data arena, and many of them are talking to us. Back in the early days, we were on Twitter, of course, so these are ways you can get in touch with us. But I also wanted to let you know that the 4 cities involved here in the G4, as we're calling it, Ottawa, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Toronto, have been talking since the early days as well. And that's been a real benefit to us, certainly in the city of Toronto, but also as we head westward. It's a chance for us to discuss what's going on, and at some point maybe we'll enlarge the G4, but this group has been around and talking for a long time, and because Vancouver and Edmonton were very strong in the early days, it was really helpful to us to understand what they were doing with policies and the license and those kinds of things. So the G4_open, you can also get some information. And more recently, the PSOD, I don't know how we want to short form that, PSOD, 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 Ontario Public Sector Open Data Group. And I mentioned that the province is coming into open data in a big way, and so this is a great thing that the province has instigated. It's kind of a community practice group, and more cities are joining on. And one of the things we're hoping to bite into this year is standards. which is a really huge issue as we've seen 5 years in. The fact that, and I often quote you, Richard, actually, about that, is it first name last name first? It's even on that level where some people just do it differently. So we're hoping we can have at least the discussion and see what we might be able to do. And of course, Mars is involved in that, MISA, U of T, the academic community. So we're actually going to see a lot of, I think, informed discussion about where we can go. And you can get information about that at Ontario Open. So that's been really helpful to us. And I'm just about done my basic part, and I wanted to close with an open, which is the open data song. Every movement needs a song, correct? So, yes, I'm going to play the guitar and sing for you. I told you we were out there. So this isn't quite give peace a chance, but we'll get there eventually. So we'll see if we get some sound coming through. Is it coming through? Ah, very good. You'll get a chance to sing at the very end. You say data, I say data, but it doesn't really matter. Open data or open data, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's free, machine readable, and available. You may say a PDF is good enough. If they don't like it, well, that's just tough. But that's not open. That data's frozen. Can't boil that ocean. Here's a notion. Make it free, machine readable, and available. You say data, I say data, but it doesn't really matter. Open data, open data. No, it doesn't really matter as long as it's free, machine readable, and available. Great. As long as it's free, machine readable, and available. As long as it's free, machine readable, and available. The open data song. Thank you. And thank you for the dance. So, the end. Yes, here's how you can get a hold of me, the Get Keith thing. My mail is up here, McDonald, they lost the D, but KMCDONAL at toronto.ca. I tweet at Caught Keith. Our website, of course, is toronto.ca open, and you can mail us also at the Open Data mail address, which is opendata at toronto.ca, and our tweets are open_TO. And the best thing we get, hearing from the community, in fact, is your asks. What is it you're looking for? And it's way more powerful than us knocking on the doors of the various divisions in the city and saying, we think this might be good data to put on the website. If we actually have the strength of people asking for it with defined uses, it's even better, way more powerful. So definitely, yeah, send us your stuff and we'll see what we can do. And back to the smiley face thing, we may not be able to say yes right away, but we're going to try for sure. So at this point, we can take some Q&A.
Perfect. I'm coming over there. Is that you, Heather? Okay.
Thanks, Keith. It's always good. I can hear that a third time. It's my second time hearing it. So my question is, what are the top searches for data that you have, and what are your surprises? What do you think the gaps are that people should be asking for, not politically motivated at all?
Well, it's interesting because there's certainly sometimes politics comes into play in terms of advocacy and community needs and that kind of thing, and that's very important to be sure. I think the most in-demand data right now is planning data, the zoning kind of information, and buildings, what's going on in the city, what's being built, where's it being built, and that kind of thing. And we don't have a lot of that on the website. Transportation was the most in demand when we first started out, and it took us a long time to actually get data from our partners. The TTC in particular obviously has that data. They steward that data. We did get it about 6 months in after we launched, so there was a huge gap there before we could get it, and that was big demand, big demand. When are you getting that data? When are you getting that data? So we were really, really happy when we finally got it there. And in between then, there's all kinds of demands, sort of our services side, like the water, water mains, that kind of stuff. Obviously, solid waste, all the garbage pickup and that kind of thing. And it took us a while to get that data up there as well. So we're not doing a bad job on some of that, but definitely there's gaps that we want to fill. And that's where I think the asks would come into play. So knowing that zoning is out there, the more requests we get, the better, because it demonstrates the need. And in fact, we've got some meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, and I would really benefit by having more mail, more examples of how people want to use it, why they want to use it, where they want to use it, and what possible outcomes they want to do with it, so we can demonstrate that there's some value here for what the community is going to create.
Other questions? Yep.
I just want to ask, how do you deal with the currency of the data and how recent the data sets are and how often you update them?
I'm nodding because currency, yeah. Well, on the website, we do post the currency, so it's listed there. And in some cases, it's old, for sure. And our goal, actually, is to have it auto-refreshing, that it's pulling all the time through APIs and everything else, that it's up there. Actually, it's kind of like old school, the way we deal with it. Like when we make a contact and a division has indicated that they want to give us data, we talk about, well, can we get it as an auto-refresh kind of thing? And if they say, yeah, I think we can work on that. And we try to assist them, too, if they think they can. If they can't, we try to track it and keep a mental note that, well, we got that stuff in June of 2000 and whatever, and it's now June of the next year, and, knock on the door again. It works better when the divisions take ownership of that, and they just automatically send it to us. So it does work both ways sometimes, but truth be told, I think we have to call them up again and say, look, you gave us that data last year, are you ready to refresh? Or, in fact, it could be 3 months, 4 months. It depends on their own rate of when they change it. So we certainly dialogue and ask that question, how often do you update this? And our goal is that it's the most current data that we can possibly present that's on the website. But if you scan the web pages, you'll see that some of the data is still a ways back. And even though we have a refreshed set of it, it's not up on the Open Data website yet. So we're looking to really to automate that as much as possible so that people don't necessarily have to even remember and think about it. It just comes in as a refreshed set of data.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Hang on.
I'm used to pointing at people. Not my job.
Hi there. I think I have two questions. Your first question was
What kind of searches do they have?
so it was about the gap that is in the data. Now, before you go there, people need to know what's in the data and how are you approaching communities and people and let them know that there is data available for them to look at. Because before this meeting, to be honest, and I'm a techie person, I never heard about it.
The website?
Yes.
Okay.
This data, it's really precious and will be gold if the more and more people will use it, right? So, like when I get the City of Toronto bills, I never ever have one of the flyers saying, if you need more data about your, I don't know, about how the water system is in the city, here is a website, like
I like that suggestion.
a little thing.
Yeah, I do. I think
there.
that's a great idea, actually.
That's how you reach more like a broader audience. And my second question. So
Can I answer just a comment on your first one? I think that's a great idea, and we're actually looking at strategies that get the word out a little further afield. One of the issues with the current Open Data website is it's really meant for the data developer person right now, meaning that you get raw data. So we are getting a lot of people saying, I can't open the file. And that's because they're not actually realizing that it's a raw data file, that that you need certain tools to work with it. So our next step actually is to provide the average consumer, a citizen who's opening their tax bill, with a means of being able to use this data. And there's several things that we might be considering putting on the website that provide those tools, and we hope to see that coming sooner than later. And that means that anyone who doesn't really understand it could come to the website and look at their community and be able to see that there's a number of things there that they could actually take a look at. And by hitting a few buttons, I'm sort of making it a short form version of that, they'd be able to get interpretations and visualizations. I think when we get to that point, that's when we would probably move into this extra marketing stream, as you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is about when you ask the community, like, we need data from the community, because you have your own sources from the City of Toronto databases and various sources, but then you need data from the community, for example, for the zoning, or for the example that for the park, let's say, you want to know what is the opinions through surveys or anything. How do you define the threshold? Like 20% of the community, 50% of the community should participate, or 100% is, so how is that kind of threshold?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't say that we've established a huge threshold. I'm a great Beatles fan, and the story of how Brian Epstein discovered the Beatles is that one person came in and asked, do you have this record by the Beatles? It was one person who asked, and his motto was, if one person is asking, maybe more people are interested. So he wouldn't order just one copy, he'd order many copies. And I can't say that if we get just one ask, we might dive in and start creating all kinds of meetings and so on, but that's not too far from the truth. And there's all kinds of surveys that go out from the city, by the way, and we would at times hope we could get data sort of into those surveys, so that's another thing that we're looking at. But even that becomes data. So we'd like to see the data of the surveys get released on the website as well, so folks have an idea of what's going on and the kinds of things we're seeing, and when we're crunching numbers, you should be able to crunch those numbers as well. So believe it or not, the threshold isn't huge. We would consider, if one person is saying this data would be useful, that means something. And there is an old adage, too, that if one person is saying it, there's a number of people, you hear numbers like 20 to 30, that also want it. They just haven't written or asked. Yes?
Given that the budget is not infinite, then how do you define the priority there? Because might be 1,000 requests, and as more exposure you have of this kind of data, people are going to ask for more things.
Yeah,
So
it's a really good question, because it's true, we can't answer all the requests, but we're pretty enthusiastic about it. So we take a holistic approach. So one request tomorrow isn't necessarily going to mean we jump into it. Whoops, I was afraid that might happen, actually. Probably was wiggling my ears. So one request tomorrow doesn't mean we're necessarily going to jump into action, but we keep it on top of mind, and if we might get another request that relates to it, we'll remember that. So we have discussions all the time, team meetings, we're looking at what's trending, if you like, and every year, of course, we sort of set the bar, where are we going to go with certain things, and I go back to planning data, for example. It's quite clear that that's sort of number one right now, so we will be putting a lot more attention into that than perhaps some of the other requests that we're getting, but our goal is not to forget. And we keep moving on and see what happens. And I'm not necessarily a patient guy in my own personal life, but I've learned to be patient in the open data milieu, because there are reasons sometimes that we can't get the data set up there. There may be things that we have to do around privacy, but I do believe that we're going to get there eventually. So we certainly take a whack at everything we hear and try to keep track of where we're going and what we missed.
The data that you receive from the different groups and organizations, do you just share that raw data with everyone, or do you format it into like a City of Toronto organized so that all of the different data sets are kind of closer?
Well, I think one of the things the ministries are finding too in the province is the same thing that we found when we first started, that is even within our own areas, even sometimes within a division, and I heard the province say this, even within the same ministry, the data comes in different ways. And not only that, sometimes the people can't exchange it. So in our own situation, a division may be collecting data that another division is also collecting, but they're collecting it for different reasons. And they may say, well, I can't share it with the other division because we were collecting it for this reason and they're collecting it for that reason, and the two of them shouldn't meet. So it's complicated. It really is. And I think that one of our jobs in the open data team is to try and wrestle with that and make it known as to why we have to bring that data together, and back to the standards issue. How can we label this that it's going to work for everybody? And a certain group may need a separate field for some reason, and that should be okay. We just have to figure out the way to do that so that if you need it, or somewhere up in Newmarket wants to use our data because they're creating something about the GTA and transportation. But it is really complex. And in fact, the data is somewhat disorganized. And when I talked about the low-hanging fruit having been picked, that was the easy stuff that was in pretty good shape. It was already in raw data files. Now we're really at that level where it is more complex. There may be things missing. There may be stuff that we could add to it if we were only able to get it from another division at the same time and try to release it together. So it's huge, and that's the messy part of data. So it's not as good as we want it to be or as it could be. And there are stuff that's up on the website too that people in the community have spotted that we've altered based on their using the data, which is a good thing. We find that healthy, but it's certainly far from perfect at this point. I'm not sure that answered your question. I hope so. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Hi, I just have a quick question on, can you speak a little bit about the organizational behavior that's with the city right now? I'm trying to think of, for the different divisional or departmental managers, what's the incentive for them to actually open their data, right? Because absence of political direction and wrestling with other, say, priorities, what's encouraging them? What's incentivizing them to actually to work towards open data? And I think it's an important issue because it sounds like there's pent-up demand for open data, and the more that we have, the more insight we have on like the organizational structure, the easier it is to advocate for better data.
Yeah, also a very good question in that sense. I guess the incentive varies between divisions. I know the province has really good incentive, and this is something that we found quite interesting. They've actually built into people's performance appraisals. So that's a pretty big incentive. We aren't there in the City of Toronto. So a lot of it really is goodwill and education, demonstrating the value. Public reaction to when they've engaged in release stuff has really helped proof of concept, if you like. So for many people, that's good enough. That is good incentive. They get it. They understand the value in democracy for open government and transparency, and all that stuff is really good. Then there's a huge chunk of people who don't necessarily see it. They're not quite in the same zone, if you like, and it's a little harder to give them kind of incentives. I mean, I wish we could. I wish we could say that, you know, if you do this, you get rewarded, but it certainly doesn't work that way. So that's our hard work, and it's not just us, again, it's the city clerk's office. Together we face this challenge. The policy, though, was a very significant development for us because it's actually written in city policy now that divisions will release their data, and it's that strong. So we've had a choice to make. Do we, you know, carry a big stick now and say, you know, the policy says? We haven't really chosen that approach. At this point, we've tried to be more back to the, you know, educate, pontificate, job relate, show how it can benefit them in their jobs and so on. So it's hard to say. I mean, we're looking at this year. How are we going to get the harder stuff? And what's it going to take? And so we've seen evidence, though, where just coming in and doing education sessions and talking about it has worked. And there's so many different divisions and so many staff that we need to approach still in the city that I'm not sure we can make a real good judgment call at this point. We just need to keep grinding away and see what's going on. But it would be nice if we had things entrenched, such as when you go into City Hall, there's a lot of posters that talk about equity and accessibility and the value of that. One of my dreams is that we actually get sort of not a groundbreaking, but everybody's sort of standing there and clipping the ribbon on a poster that says open government, open data is what we do in the City of Toronto. So we're certainly talking about it and seeing how we can roll up different things to motivate, but it's a challenge for sure.
Hi, I was just wondering if you come across any interest by individuals or groups who are interested in turning Toronto into a more walkable city, more environmentally sustainable, economically resilient.
Yeah, all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything from walking paths and the whole path system, the bike paths and everything is huge. And we've had a lot of requests and asks for that. And I think in some cases we've been able to present some of the things, but again, some of it's still a little messy in terms of, I guess the dream might be that you'd seriously be able to bike across Canada. And all the cities are presenting, you know, their pathways and that kind of thing. So yeah, we definitely had those kind of asks, and I would say that cycling folks inside the city are fairly receptive to our asks. There's maybe some more analysis that they need to do, actually more data that they need to get, but the data that they have, they've been pretty good about providing, and sort of that links into the environment for sure, which also brings me back to where the ministry's at. Some of their environment needs and data with our data would be a powerful thing if we could release it together, and our intention is that we're going to put our heads together and at least alert each other if we have a release coming, and hopefully we can start sort of presenting all the stuff at once and get it on the websites. And that would be great.
Hi, I have a quick question and even a suggestion, if I could be so bold. The question is, I'm just curious, I think Toronto's probably, and Canada as a whole, probably one of the more advanced countries in terms of IT adoption and how many consumers have mobile phones and internet access. But I was really curious, are there models from other cities who are doing this particularly well or have particular initiatives that you guys are looking towards, and perhaps there's some examples there?
Yeah, New York City. Now, it's interesting because the system in New York politically, too, is very different. The mayor has a lot of power in New York, and one of the best stories in New York is the Geek Squad. Good name for you guys as well. Not the squad, but the Geek Girls. And in fact, they were able to solve a lot of problems. The story that we relate often is the drains were being jammed up, and it was largely grease from restaurants that were illegally dumping their grease. Call in the Geek Squad, and they were tracking where the blockages were in relation to where the restaurants were, and they were bringing in inspection data on top of those layers, and they were able to actually do some great detective work. So we love that model in New York, and we're ready, we're volunteering for the Geek Squad, but we haven't been able to create one yet. But that would be really powerful, and I think it's proven to work in New York City. Some of the other cities, especially Edmonton, has been really active, and we're in the early days, and they've adopted some of the tools that we'd like to see used, as has Ottawa, and there are two different tools that they're using, so we're trying to figure out the best way to get those up there. But that would help, I think, in terms of not just the outside folks using it, but even our own internal people to understand what is that data telling us. It's the story of data. So there's a lot of cities, especially in the US, that are already there. They're presenting data in ways that everyone can start to leverage. And if we can get there, we'll be a long way to, I think, improving everybody's experience with open data and also the outcomes of how it's used. But I would definitely cite New York, Edmonton, Ottawa, Vancouver as places that we've learned from and that we would like to adopt some of the things that they've got going.
My suggestion was perhaps adding an inspiration gallery there in terms of mixing the ingredients and letting people digest it of different projects that have used open data and the value it has.
It's a great idea. That's where the data A side could fill in exactly, for sure.
Well, you already have that.
Yeah, we have the data A, but it's not the easiest to use. For example, it's not really a true social media platform. We'd like it to be.
No, there's a page on the site that actually shows all the different projects that are currently using data.
It shows the apps. Yeah. Yep, it's our apps page. But I think you were thinking bigger than that even, right?
Yeah, I put it right front and center so people understand the value behind the data and perhaps get inspired to contribute.
Photos. Videos. Yes, we want to do more work with videos. We do have a YouTube channel for the city, and there are some open data legacy stuff in particular up on the YouTube channel. So there is an open data channel inside the channel.
Can we get a policy right up front that says no selfies?
Sure, I'd go for that. I just want to get back to the data page. Any other questions at this point? Yeah, okay.
You spoke about the municipal-provincial relationship with regards to open data. I was wondering if you can comment on the federal-municipal relationship, especially in light of the census being trimmed not so long ago.
Yeah, I think one of the big things we've seen from citizens is the confusion of who stewards what. And from the public standpoint, maybe it shouldn't matter. Like, they shouldn't necessarily know that the feds look after this, the province looks after that, and the city looks after this. So another goal we have is like a federated site where all the data is pushed to a website. So it's holistic. It covers federal, provincial, and municipal. The feds are quite active as well. Tony Clement, in fact, deserves a shout out for being quite active in the open data arena, and he spearheaded an Open Data License Canada, which we've adopted and Ontario adopted, and it's very, very similar wording. The only differences really are some of the legislation. For instance, in Toronto, we have to cite the City of Toronto Act, whereas Guelph won't be able to cite that same act. But except for those few exceptions, the language is actually identical. So that means as a developer, you could take the data from Toronto, from Guelph, from Edmonton, which also adopted the same license, and the federal information, and put it together in a mashup without any difficulties at all. So I would say, too, the federal government is moving into open data as well in a big way. The difference, I guess, between the province is that they've sort of put this into their performance appraisals, and it's mandated that they start getting this data out. So in that sense, I think they're probably a little more extensive about it in its completeness of the goal than perhaps the cities or the feds. But of course, we all have lots and lots of data, so how we approach it is going to be a little different, I guess, between us all. But I don't think anyone's objecting to that idea of getting it all into one place eventually, but so much of it goes back to the standards.
Once upon a time, there was a website called Buzz Data. Did you ever hear of it?
Yes. Yeah.
That was their goal, was it not, to provide
Yes, it
us?
was.
And they would, in fact, link to, if you had a use for data, you would link to the data and it would track who was using it.
Yeah, exactly. Great
I believe
concept.
they changed their
Yeah, I think some people moved on and it just kind of
collapsed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then there's an opening in the market.
It's very true, and it's a good example too of how the outside sort of area can really help us. Some of our difficulties inside is that just the issue of talking to each other and trying to make decisions between divisions, and it's not always easy. So sometimes if an outside person or group can come in and say, listen, I've leveraged your data, and here it is, we're not against that at all, and in fact it can be really helpful.
I just want to dredge up the accessibility question, because I think you could speak to it too.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't sure if I should weigh in at the time, but then I realized I could probably do so on the Q&A portion for me. Actually, the law is quite firm in that any service outlet, including the web, has to be accessible. And there's some timelines put on it, but it's more or less here right now, meaning, yes, the website should be accessible. So our goal is to make sure that the catalog is available no matter what your impairment might be. So if you're visually impaired, you're still able to actually access the data. Now that doesn't mean that the raw data still doesn't mean you need a tool to work with that data. That's sort of where our responsibility ends. You'd have to make sure that the tool you're using also works for you. But we do have to make sure that you can come to the website and find the data sets and download the data sets. And as I say, there's some timelines on it. But largely, in fact, a PDF as a format, we're really trying to downgrade the use of PDFs on the website, partly because of the accessibility issue. And that really relates to open data as well, because so much of the data that's released is in a PDF form. And we're actually using the AODA legislation as a hook to say, well, look, let's just get it outside of the PDF altogether. And certainly if we do present it as a PDF, the PDF has to be made accessible. The law does say it's a bit go forward, though. It's new web. So there's a whole bunch of old web, legacy web, if you like, that's still a bit gray zone, if you like. But it's definitely been legislated, and I think you'll find all of the websites related from the province to the cities are going to have to conform to accessibility. And certainly if we hear that something's not accessible for any reason, we do want to know about it. And there was a debate actually several years ago about, not several years ago, probably about 4 years ago, about our license, which said that the link had to be made to the website. That's since changed a little bit. Now it really says if the format warrants it. So the person that was questioning us was saying it's a printed map, and it's actually in Braille. So I can't make a link, a physical link to the website, although we were saying that you could put toronto.ca open as a website, and if they go to the web pages, they could get it. So yeah, those issues have bubbled up occasionally for the open data website, but we look at it as more the website in its whole. Toronto.ca has to be accessible, and that means the open data presence has to be accessible.
We'll take one last question.
So I'm curious about how smaller sets of qualitative data fit into open data.
Can you give me an example?
So I mean, I guess a lot of what we saw, examples of data, are like spreadsheets of numbers, and I'm just thinking about some of the stuff I do is like interview people, right? So, or usability testing, which is like 8 to 10 people, one-on-one. It's very qualitative, it's very narrative oriented, and it's about kind of quality of life and some of the types of things that quant data doesn't always expose in as rich a way.
Yeah, you know, that's the first time I've ever gotten that question.
Did you want to comment on that, Bianca? All right.
That's public consultation, because that's what we get. We get all written comments all the time, and I think about that. You might eventually have to put them in a table. Like if you have an environmental assessment, yes, they will end up in a table, like it or not. They're going to be an unruly thing. But I think having them available in that format is helpful, because just having them en masse, we say all the time, we'll publish an appendix of all the comments we received. I don't think there's a great analytics tool right now that has, I mean, there's sentiment analysis, there's a lot of stuff available that you can use to try to pick up the meaning, but I know we get this all the time because when we write reports, we try to make them advice oriented, right? And it's like the community wants you to do this, this, this. people will say, well, did 50% of them want it? Did 30? Did 20? Did 11? Like, what is it? And we don't write numbers down. We say many, some, one, right? And I think it's kind of, I'm not sure what the middle ground is, but that's how we manage it, is we find some sort of human quantitative version of how to cluster the qualitative stuff. But I think a lot about that question is totally on my mind all the time. So I think at least having all that stuff cataloged somewhere is a first step, but I don't know exactly what to do with it. Heather got something? This is like the Roman mic. Okay.
While you're moving over there, one of the issues that I found on the website that I'm not sure if you found is our metadata isn't too good. We just released defibrillator data in all the city facilities. Now, where would you go looking for the defib data? You know, that's the clear, the heart attack saver thing that you need to get within 2 minutes, so it's valuable data. But where would you look for it on our data catalog? I mean, we have a A, B, C, D, E. Where would you go? Under the D, right? You're never going to guess where it is. It's under the A for automatic external defibrillators. So that's something that one of our things this year is we want to try and work on. This is in our work plan, to try and make it a little more intuitive that you can find it. So defibs under A. Makes sense, right?
If I could, I just wanted to speak to your comment about citizen data. So I work in crisis mapping citizen data. I think that the open data that governments collect, and they have it on a government platform, that there's been a movement internationally to collect your own data, right? So much like Bianca was talking about people providing input in consultations, there are online tools and free tools that you can use to collect and aggregate that information from your communities, your own self, whether you're using text message programs, whether you're using maps, you can do that. And some of those programs are First Mile Geo, which is walking papers where you can collect that data, much like the guys in Montreal were doing, but put it on OpenStreetMap because it is actually opened, and the map they use was Google. Not that I don't love Google, no offense. The second one is Ushahidi or CrowdMap, which allows you to be able to kind of put either text messages or other social media content or reports or online reports on that. And there are other tools like Mapbox or what have you that will allow you to collect that data yourself and then add it as a layer of comparison. So I think the best data that's going to happen in the future is going to be a layer of citizen data. So the stuff we collect about our communities, our neighborhoods, compare it to the stuff that our official government organizations are holding, and then adding a layer of sensor data. So then you have the earth talking to you, you have citizens talking, and you have the government. And then you have a full kind of round circle comparative. So that's the big dream.
Yeah, and therein lies the value of data as the great neutralizer in that sense, where we're all working from the same information source. How can we not make better informed decisions if we have access to all of that? And that doesn't mean one group has the access. Everybody should have the access.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Big round of applause.